The first and perhaps most transformative step you can take to change your life forever is learning how to activate your autonomic nervous system intentionally, especially first thing in the morning. This isn't about motivation. This is about biology. The moment you wake up, your brain and body are shifting out of a state of rest and recovery and into a state of alertness, readiness, and action. How you handle this window, the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking, has a massive downstream effect on your focus, mood, energy, and decision-making throughout the day. One of the most powerful ways to take control of this shift is through exposure to natural light. When your eyes receive light, especially sunlight, early in the day, a signal is sent via pathway in your retina to a region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, which is your master circadian clock. This clock regulates nearly every function in your body. Your sleep-wake cycles, hormone release, body temperature, and even gene expression. Morning sunlight acts as the start button for this system. It triggers a cortisol pulse N, which in the morning is healthy, sets your alertness rhythm, and regulates melatonin, so starts rising later in the evening, helping you sleep more deeply and consistently. This isn't just theoretical. Studies have shown that getting 5 to 10 minutes of natural sunlight exposure within 30 to 60 minutes of waking can help reduce depression, enhance motivation, improve metabolic health, and sharpen focus. On cloudy days, you may need closer to 15 to 30 minutes, but the impact remains. Light from screens or indoor bulbs simply doesn't have the same lux intensity or biological power as sunlight, even when it's overcast. Sunlight is the trigger, and your physiology is the switchboard. Now, layer onto this the second half of this practicey movement, getting the body moving soon after waking through a short walk, light stretching, breath work, or a brief bodyweight circuit stimulates the release of dopamine and epinephrine, chemicals that signal your brain to increase alertness, attention, and motivation. Movement increases your heart rate, activates your sympathetic nervous system in a controlled way, and promotes blood flow to the brain, enhancing cognitive clarity. The combination of sunlight and movement is not just additive, it's synergistic. When you move while exposed to natural light, your nervous system locks into a state of forward movement, both psychologically and physiologically. This primes your brain to approach tasks with more focus and less resistance. It's not a mindset shift. It's a state shift initiated by environmental input and biological response. In addition to the benefits during the day, this morning ritual has a profound effect on your sleep at night. When you receive light early in the day, you are anchoring your circadian rhythm, making it easier for your brain to release melatonin at the appropriate time 12 to 16 hours later. This means deeper sleep, better hormone balance, and improved recovery, all of which compound over time to affect energy levels, emotional regulation, and long-term resilience. For those who live in places with limited morning sun, especially in the winter months, artificial daylight simulators or 10,000 lux light boxes can be used as a substitute, though they should be positioned correctly and used early in the day for 10 to 30 minutes. Still, outdoor light remains the gold standard whenever possible. To put it simply, when you take control of your mornings, you take control of your brain. And when you take control of your brain, you take control of your life. The nervous system is plastic. It changes based on experience. And every morning you have the opportunity to create the kind of neural input that builds the output you want, whether that's discipline, clarity, or momentum. Most people live reactively, checking phones, diving into stress, and stumbling into their day. But those who change their lives start by changing the very first signal they send to their brain and body each morning. Light and movement aren't optional. They're foundational tools for high performance, emotional balance, and long-term mental health. To create lasting change in your life, you must first reclaim control over your focus. And that begins with understanding dopamine, the brain's primary motivation and reward molecule. Dopamine is not about pleasure alone. It's about desire, drive, and pursuit. It's the neurotransmitter that fuels goal-directed behavior. But in today's world, dopamine is being hijacked at an unprecedented scale by behaviors that artificially spike it, leaving you exhausted, distracted, and addicted to short-term gratification. If you want to change your life forever, you have to remove the hijackers that are stealing your brain's ability to stay focused and motivated. What are dopamine hijackers? They are habits and behaviors that create unnaturally high surges of dopamine with very little effort. Social media, Junk food, excessive screen time, pornography, and multitasking are the most common culprits. These activities tap into the brain's reward system by releasing large amounts of dopamine instantly, but with the biological balance that comes from effort-based reward. This imbalance leads to what's known in neuroscience as dopamine depletion. When dopamine is spiked too often, the receptors become less sensitive and your baseline levels of motivation drop. That means you start to feel unmotivated, unfocused, and unable to find satisfaction in normal, healthy activities like learning, working, exercising, or connecting with people. This isn't just a psychological issue. It's a physiological response routed in the brain's reward circuitry. When your dopamine system is constantly overstimulated, it begins to shut down its responsiveness. You need more stimulation to feel the same level of drive. And the things that once felt meaningful now feel boring or overwhelming. This is why many people struggle with procrastination, burnout, and the inability to start or finish important tasks. It's not that they lack discipline. It's that their reward system has been rewired by overexposure to artificial dopamine triggers. The solution isn't to eliminate all sources of dopamine. Dopamine is essential for survival and success, but to rebalance the dopamine system by removing the sources that are hijacking it. This begins with awareness. Audit your daily behaviors. How often are you reaching for your phone? How much time are you spending on apps that are designed to exploit your attention? How often are you chasing hits of pleasure without any real effort? Start by reducing or removing one major hijacker for a set period, say 30 days. For many, social media is the most potent hijacker. Deleting it from your phone or using it only during designated windows drastically reduces artificial dopamine stimulation. In parallel, you want to start earning your dopamine through effort-based activities. The brain releases dopamine not just after achieving something, but also during the pursuit of that goal, especially when the pursuit involves effort and challenge. Physical exercise, deep focused work, delayed gratification, cold exposure, learning new skills, and creative problem solving all activate dopamine systems in a sustainable and healthy way. These practices teach your brain that dopamine is tied to action and intention, not just consumption. Another important concept is dopamine stacking. When you combine multiple sources of stimulation at once, like eating junk food while watching fast-paced videos or scrolling through social media during a workout, this compounds the problem. By removing the stacking effect and simplifying your experiences, you allow your dopamine system to reset. For example, when exercising, avoid listening to music or checking your phone. When eating, don't combine it with screen time. Let the activity itself be enough. Over time, your baseline dopamine levels begin to rise again, and your brain starts to find joy and motivation in simple, effortful tasks. This process is called a dopamine reset, and it takes consistency. Early on, you may feel boredom or restlessness. That's your brain adjusting to lower stimulation. But within days or weeks, you'll begin to notice sharper focus, increased drive, and a return of motivation. Your mind becomes clearer. You'll stop feeling overstimulated and underwhelmed. You'll begin to crave meaningful action rather than passive consumption. This shift is critical for long-term success because it gives you the internal resources to pursue difficult goals without constantly seeking external validation or stimulation. By eliminating dopamine hijackers, you restore the natural rhythm of desire and reward, allowing you to focus deeply, delay gratification, and build the type of neural pathways that lead to resilience, discipline, and lasting fulfillment. One of the most overlooked yet most powerful tools for life transformation lies in something you do every single day, often without realizing its impact: your internal narration. The way you talk to yourself, the stories you repeat in your mind, and the identity you reinforce through thought patterns are all directly shaping the wiring of your brain. This process is called self-directed neuroplasticity, and it refers to your brain's capacity to rewire itself based on conscious thought and mental rehearsal. In simple terms, what you repeatedly think about, focus on, and imagine becomes the neural blueprint for how you perceive yourself and how you behave. Your brain is constantly forming and strengthening synaptic connections when you engage in mental repetition. Especially thoughts that are emotionally charged, you're carving pathways that influence future decisions, habits, and emotional responses. If those thoughts are negative, self-sabotaging, or rooted in fear, the brain adapts accordingly. It becomes more efficient at recognizing patterns of limitation and doubt. On the other hand, when you engage in intentional, positive internal dialogue and mental rehearsal of who you want to become, you activate the same neural circuits that would be involved if you were actually performing the actions in real life. This is not positive thinking in a superficial sense. It's neurobiological training. Neuroscience research shows that visualizing a future version of yourself and mentally rehearsing the steps to become that person activates the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for planning, goal setting, and self-regulation. At the same time, it can reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, helping you build confidence and reduce internal resistance. When repeated consistently, this practice creates durable structural changes in the brain, making new behaviors feel more natural over time. To put this into practice, begin by defining the identity you want to step into. Be specific. Instead of vague goals like, I want to be successful, articulate clear internal identities. I am the kind of person who shows up every day and does deep work, even when it's hard. Or, I am the person who speaks with confidence and follows through on commitments. Then, rehearse this identity in your mind as vividly as possible. See yourself waking up early, going to the gym, speaking on stage, writing your book, or launching your business. Feel the emotional tone of that experience. The more sensory and emotionally real the visualization is, the stronger the neurological imprint becomes. Pair this mental practice with internal dialogue regulation. Start noticing the unconscious scripts you're running. I always mess this up. I'm not disciplined. Or, I'll never change. These are not harmless thoughts. They are instructions to your nervous system. When repeated, they shape your self-concept and influence how your brain filters opportunities, threats, and even your own potential. Replace them not with delusional optimism, but with empowering, realistic affirmations tied to behavior. I'm learning to be consistent. Each time I show up, I'm reinforcing my new identity. Or, I can do hard things even when I don't feel like it. One of the most effective times to use this technique is during transitional states, right before sleep and immediately after waking. When the brain is in a highly suggestible alpha or theta state, during these windows, the subconscious mind is more receptive to input and neural consolidation is more likely to occur. Use these moments to replay your vision, reinforce your future identity, and practice gratitude for your progress. Over time, this becomes not just a mental practice, but a neural retraining protocol that accelerates growth and rewires your default behavior settings. Language is not just for communication. It's a tool for programming the mind. The words you silently say to yourself generate internal feedback loops that alter hormone release, emotional regulation, and even immune response. Cognitive behavioral neuroscience confirms that shifting self-talk can reduce anxiety, boost performance, and elevate cognitive control. When you change your narration, you change the input that your brain uses to make predictions about who you are, and what you're capable of. Neuroplasticity is not passive. It requires deliberate direction. By repeatedly visualizing the version of yourself you are becoming, by narrating your growth rather than your limitations, and by emotionally linking your thoughts to your values and goals, you become the architect of your identity at the neural level. This practice is not about pretending you're perfect. It's about repeatedly instructing your brain to expect transformation until that transformation becomes your new baseline. Lasting life change is not the result of one major decision or a burst of motivation. It's the result of small, consistent actions that you repeat daily until they become part of your identity. These small but strategic actions are what behavioral scientists call keystone habits. A keystone habit is a single behavior that, once established, causes a ripple effect across other areas of your life. It anchors your routine, strengthens your discipline, and becomes a stable reference point for your brain and body to rely on. The key is that these habits are non-negotiable. They don't depend on how you feel. They depend on who you've decided to become. To understand why keystone habits work, you have to look at how the brain stores and automates behavior. The basal ganglia, a group of structures deep in the brain, is responsible for habit formation and motor control. When a behavior is repeated in a consistent context, the brain begins to automate it, reducing the energy and attention required to complete the action. This automation creates mental space for higher order thinking and frees up cognitive resources. But more importantly, habits begin to form the scaffolding of identity. Each time you complete your non-negotiable routine, you send a signal to your brain. This is who I am. I am someone who follows through. The most effective keystone habits are simple, repeatable, and connected to a greater purpose. For example, a daily habit of writing in a journal each morning may seem small, but it trains your brain to reflect, organize thoughts, and align with your goals. Over time, this builds self-awareness, emotional regulation, and goal clarity. Another powerful keystone habit is daily exercise. Even just 230 minutes of movement per day can enhance cognitive performance, elevate mood by boosting endorphins and dopamine, and improve sleep quality. What matters most is not intensity, but consistency. The more a habit is repeated at the same time and in the same context, the more deeply it becomes embedded in your neural architecture. To build effective keystone habits, anchor them to specific times or triggers in your environment. This is known as implementation intention, and it is a proven way to increase follow-through. Rather than saying, I'll meditate today, say, I'll meditate for 5 minutes right after I make my bed. Linking the new habit to an existing one strengthens the behavioral chain and creates fewer decision points. The fewer decisions you need to make, the more likely you are to follow through, because willpower is limited, but systems are scalable. What makes keystone habits different from ordinary habits is their power to create identity reinforcement loops. When you perform a keystone habit consistently, you begin to see yourself differently. You start to adopt the mindset of someone who is disciplined, intentional, and aligned. This identity shift makes it easier to take on new challenges because the question is no longer, can I do this? But is this aligned with who I am? That shift in framing reduces internal resistance and increases emotional buy-in. One of the most underrated aspects of keystone habits is their regulatory effect on stress and chaos. In moments of uncertainty, stress, or emotional overwhelm, having non-negotiable behaviors you return to creates psychological stability. The predictability of your keystone habits becomes a form of safety for your nervous system. They tell your brain, I have control over this part of my life. This lowers cortisol, improves emotional resilience, and increases your sense of agency. Over time, these small acts of structure act as an antidote to disorder. It's also important to track your keystone habits, not in a perfectionist way, but to create a visual feedback loop that reinforces your progress. Whether you use a calendar, a journal, or a habit tracker app, visually marking your consistency activates your reward system and deepens your commitment. Each check mark becomes a form of positive reinforcement, a tangible reminder that you're building something durable. Another powerful layer to add is emotional anchoring. When you complete your habit, take a few seconds to feel the emotional resonance of following through. This might be pride, momentum, or even simple satisfaction. That emotional charge helps strengthen the neural pathway associated with the habit. The brain remembers what is emotionally significant. So when you anchor your habits, not just with time and action, but also with feeling, you increase their staying power. Start with just one keystone habit. Keep it simple and repeatable. Once it becomes second nature, layer on the next one. These non-negotiables will start to form the core of your behavioral identity. They won't just help you become more productive. They will become the foundation for transformation, making you the kind of person who doesn't rely on motivation or external pressure, but instead operates from a place of internal structure, discipline, and aligned action. One of the most effective ways to change your life permanently isn't just about building better habits. It's about making bad habits harder to perform. This is the neuroscience of friction, and it plays a critical role in behavior change. Your brain is fundamentally energy efficient. It's constantly looking for the easiest, lowest resistance path to meet its needs. This principle is rooted in what psychologists call behavioral economics, but it's also deeply supported by neurobiology. The human nervous system favors behaviors that are easily accessible and frictionless. So if destructive behaviors like excessive phone use, mindless eating, or binge watching content are effortless to access, your brain will default to them, even when you consciously want to stop. The solution is not just to use willpower. Willpower is a depletable resource. What works more reliably is engineering your environment to make negative behaviors inconvenient, unattractive, or harder to initiate. This creates friction, which interrupts the brain's automaticity and gives the prefrontal cortex, your executive decision-making center, a chance to re-engage. In simple terms, you're putting space between the urge and the action. That space gives you time to become conscious of what you're doing and why. Take the example of digital distraction. If your phone is always in your pocket or on your desk, within reach and lit up with notifications, you're placing a dopamine delivery system inches from your hand at all times. The easiest behavior is to check it. Now imagine instead that your phone is in another room, in a drawer, and you've disabled all notifications except for essential calls or alarms. Just that minor inconvenience. Getting up, going into another space, unlocking it, adds enough friction to interrupt the automatic habit loop. This strategy aligns directly with how the basal ganglia and prefrontal cortex interact. You're overriding the habit loop by creating space for decision making. Friction can be physical, digital, social, or even emotional. Physical friction includes things like putting junk food out of reach or removing it from the house entirely. If it's not there, your brain doesn't get the visual or sensory cue to trigger the craving loop. Digital friction might involve deleting social media apps, logging out after every session, or using grayscale mode on your phone to reduce its visual appeal. Social friction could include telling someone your goal to reduce a certain habit. So now there's accountability. Emotional friction can involve attaching a specific pain or consequence to a behavior, such as journaling how you feel after engaging in a destructive habit and keeping that entry visible for reflection. This approach is deeply rooted in the way habits form in the brain. The more accessible a behavior is, the faster the reward loop completes. Dopamine gets released when your brain anticipates reward, and the shorter the path from trigger to reward, the stronger the habit. By adding friction, you stretch out that timeline, which disrupts the immediate feedback loop and gives your rational mind more control. Over time, as you perform the negative behavior less frequently, the neural circuits tied to it begin to atrophy, a phenomenon called synaptic pruning. The brain literally starts deleting connections it no longer uses, which is a foundational part of neuroplasticity. In contrast, as you reduce destructive behaviors, you simultaneously free up energy and cognitive bandwidth for better habits to form. For instance, if you reduce time spent on social media by just 1 hour a day, that's 30 hours per month you can now invest into learning, exercising, creating, or simply resting, each of which reinforces a different self-image. This cumulative effect of less distraction and more intention compounds into identity change. It's also important to structure your environment not just for friction, but for cue redesign. Most bad habits begin with a trigger: boredom, stress, fatigue, or even specific times of day. By recognizing these triggers, you can swap the automatic behavior with a healthier one. For example, instead of reaching for your phone every time you're bored, place a nearby or keep a notebook where you can write a quick idea or insight. By making these alternative behaviors more accessible and the destructive ones less accessible, you shift the equation in your favor. Another advanced method is using commitment devices, which are tools or agreements that make it costly to break your intention. This could be as simple as setting up a website blocker during work hours, or as structured as a financial accountability system where you lose money if you break a habit. The underlying neuroscience here is the same. When the cost of the bad habit increases and the reward decreases, the brain naturally re-evaluates the behavior and reduces its likelihood of recurrence. A changing your life forever requires creating an internal environment that supports discipline. But that begins with curating the external environment that drives most of your decisions without conscious awareness. Your surroundings are either nudging you toward your goals or pulling you away from them. By intentionally building friction around behaviors that undermine your progress, you reclaim control over your actions, reduce decision fatigue, and shift from reactivity to intentionality, one of the most overlooked aspects of building a resilient, focused, and high-performance life is the ability to regulate your internal state under stress. In other words, success is not just about knowing what to do. It's about remaining composed and in control while doing it, especially under pressure. This ability is routed in your autonomic nervous system, which includes the sympathetic branch responsible for the fight or flight response and the parasympathetic branch responsible for rest and recovery. These systems operate mostly below conscious awareness, but with the right tools and practices, you can train them. Controlled exposure to discomfort is one of the most powerful and scientifically supported methods for doing exactly that. Your nervous system is constantly scanning your environment and your internal state for cues of safety or threat. This process is known as neuroception, and it influences everything from your decision making to your breathing patterns, your focus, and your emotional regulation. When you're under stress, your body releases adrenaline, cortisol, and other neurochemicals designed to help you survive. But if you never learn how to voluntarily step into and manage those stress responses, your system becomes reactive instead of responsive. Over time, this results in burnout, anxiety, emotional volatility, and poor performance under pressure. Controlled discomfort practices are tools that allow you to simulate stress in a safe and intentional way so that your nervous system learns how to adapt and recalibrate. These can include cold exposure, intense physical training, breath work, fasting, and even focused mental challenges. What all of these have in common is that they stress the system without causing damage. This is called hormetic stress, a small, tolerable dose of stress that triggers adaptation, much like how lifting weights breaks down muscle to rebuild it stronger. The same applies to your nervous system. By pushing into short bouts of discomfort voluntarily, you expand your capacity to handle stress without losing control. Take cold exposure as an example. When you expose yourself to cold through a cold shower or ice bath, your sympathetic nervous system is immediately activated. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and your mind wants to escape the experience. But when you deliberately stay in it, focus on your breath, and bring your system back under control, you are training what's known as top-down regulation. This is where the prefrontal cortex, your rational executive brain, takes control over the limbic system, which governs fear and impulse. Doing this repeatedly builds a kind of neural muscle that you can access in daily life when you encounter emotional, physical, or psychological stressors. The same principle applies during intense exercise. When you're exhausted, your heart is pounding, and your brain is telling you to quit, but you instead focus, control your breath, and continue with intention. You're not just building physical endurance. You're building emotional and neurological resilience. You're teaching your nervous system that you can stay calm in chaos. And the benefits of that carry into your work, your relationships, your self-discipline, and your confidence. Breathwork is another key practice that offers direct access to the autonomic nervous system. Slow, deliberate exhalations increase parasympathetic tone and reduce the stress response,